For our various last section of this unit, we're going to be going over the angle of elevation and the angle of depression, right? So that's kind of the idea of what we're looking at. All right, so we're looking at these angles and what they do and how this kind of works out. Really, all this plays back into trigonometry, right? What we just kind of did. Except now, when we take a look at this, when we're looking at these two types of angles of elevation and depression, it's real world scenarios that you use trigonometry to actually kind of solve for this stuff. And that helps if you create a picture. Right, so the idea is, even looking at this one picture, right? You see, you got this boy who's looking up this hang glider up here. Yes, it's a hang glider guy. You can kind of see him, but he's looking up there, right? The angle that it creates from where the top of it, where his eyesight is, right? Because that's where that line is pointing at. This horizontal line is pointing at his eyesight. Well, the angle he tilts his head to look up is 38 degrees. So, nothing too crazy, pretty straightforward. You've kind of seen this before. This is 38 degrees. Well, what's happening is because this is a horizontal line, it creates this right triangle. That this is one of the angles, and then if you drop straight down from where that hang glider is, from the eyesight to the hang glider, if you drop a line straight down, well, look, it creates this 90 degree or this right angle triangle, right? It's a right triangle. And we've already talked about this stuff, right? If you know what the angle is, you can figure out the different sizes. You can use SOHCAHTOA, right? Again, so it does. This all comes back to trigonometry, right? And that's why it says we use trigonometry to kind of figure this out. Because if we know one of the angles, we can kind of figure out the rest of it, kind of based on this stuff. All right. And here's the thing too. Um, it creates these two types of angles, right? So this angle of elevation and this angle of depression. Well, because everything is horizontal, right? We have these two horizontal lines. What also ends up happening is that we get these two parallel lines. These two lines are parallel, they're the same, and so it also creates another right angle triangle. So you got another right triangle that's right here. So what's happening, right? So a lot of cool things are happening. We create this rectangle, this box. We cut this straight in half with these two angles. As you can see, right, since these two lines are parallel, there's a lot going on that we've talked about before. Since these two lines are parallel, and these are both 38 degrees, well, these are congruent. So, the angle elevation and the angle of depression are actually congruent. And since these two angles are congruent, these two triangles are congruent, these two lengths are congruent, right? All this stuff is all congruent, right? All the things that are happening, all this stuff is kind of going on, right? So not only this, but they're also congruent. Those are congruent. These two sides are congruent. Obviously, the hypotenuse is also congruent to itself, right? You see all this that's going on, that's happening? So if an angle elevation, angle depression, when you create this stuff, you actually create congruent right triangles. So really, in reality, this is all kind of the same thing. You can solve for a lot of these sides using, again, using trigonometry. If you know one angle, you can kind of figure out the rest of this stuff and how we're going about this, right? You can find these ratios, you can find all this stuff, and it creates these congruent right triangles. Because again, there's parallel lines, it creates this whole box. It works out, right? So it's kind of great. Um, and it makes things really easy too, right? Because you know this is 38 degrees, you know this is a right angle, so I mean you can solve for this one too. Because if this side's 38, this is supposed to be 90, right? You kind of go about that. A lot of different ways you can kind of solve for this stuff. So it makes things super easy. You find all these different things. If you know this angle, um, right, to solve for this one right there, you do 90 minus 38, right? You kind of go about it, do what you're supposed to be doing. What is that? 42? Yeah. No, 52. 52. A lot of different things with this stuff, right? So it fairly pulls together all this that we're talking about, we've been talking about, right? So angles of elevation, depression, a lot's going on, but we can figure out a lot of these different things, right? It really pulls together, right, all this right angle stuff we've been talking about, parallel sides, these types of angles that's going on, and kind of what happens too, right? And also, because this one's 32 or 52 degrees right here, well, this one over here is also 52 degrees, right? It creates all these cool little things, these cool little nuances that kind of happen because they can create congruent right triangles. So we're going to use trigonometry. That's one of the big ones we're going to solve for this stuff by even creating a picture for this, right? So in that case, yeah, we can kind of go about this. We can kind of figure these things out. And all has to do with the fact that, whoops, we have these parallel lines that we kind of go through this. So we're going to work on this. We're going to find all these different angles. We're going to start labeling things, right? Again, I guess that's something I could write at the very bottom. As always, label as much as possible, because that's always going to help out. All right, that's it. We'll talk about all this stuff in class, relates to trigonometry, setting up these triangles.